Hi, I'm Lance Cottrell, Chief Scientist for Ntrepid, and this is the Ntrepid blog. So if you've been to a security trade show recently, or just been subject to the endless emails of security vendors, you've probably heard a huge amount about mobile malware and the existential threat this kind of mobile attack poses to your corporate network or infrastructure. And so we're often asked by our customers, why doesn't Passages have a version of our secure virtual browser for mobile, for Android, or for iOS? And the reality is, we focus on where the pain is, and there isn't actually any pain from web-delivered malware on mobile devices. In fact, Verizon's 2015 breach survey looked at mobile malware, and they headlined their section in the following way. They said, "I got 99 problems, and mobile malware isn't even 1% of them." They said, it's a complete non-issue. When you look at the actual sources of breaches, it doesn't come from mobile devices, iOS or Android phones or tablets. Only 0.3% of Android devices are infected in any given week. So if you just look at every device in the world, a tiny, tiny fraction of them are infected. iOS, they weren't even able to measure the amount of iOS infection. In fact, they said the majority of attacks against iOS that they saw were actually misdirected attacks against Android, which just happened to show up on those. Now, that's not to say that Android and iOS are invulnerable. No operating system or application is invulnerable. But when you see reports of breaches or attacks against mobile devices, they're almost always either Trojan software or attacks that require proximity to or physical access of the device, which is to say these aren't things that scale. They're not something you can get hit by some hacker in a foreign country. It's someone who has to be tightly targeting you to get physical or nearby access to your phone. The most common form of infection is Trojan software. So the user goes to an app store and downloads some malware that then takes over their device. And this isn't usually the well-known app stores, but in Android it would be someone going to some third-party app store. With iOS it would be someone who's jailbroken their phone and is going to an app store for jailbroken applications. You then install this bad software, it takes over your phone, and you're owned. Well, that's a problem, but that's not a browser-based problem. That's a problem with circumventing the security built into these app stores to install some third-party app of your own desiring. And Apple's made it so hard you actually have to jailbreak the phone, voiding your warranty to even get that software on there. The other attacks are physical proximity attacks. Someone will discover that if you plug the phone into the USB port or into the Lightning port, they can run software that will allow them to reconfigure the phone and push malware onto that. But that requires physical access to the phone. We've seen attacks that involve spoofing the cell tower and then trying to push updates to the phone. And that's been effective, but that is a fairly aggressive attack. It's extremely sophisticated and requires, again, real proximity to that phone. This is not going to be a large-scale, widespread kind of attack. I think it's interesting that Apple actually pulled all of the anti-malware software out of the iOS App Store because it was all snake oil. None of it actually did anything. Because of the way Apple sandboxes the phone, it was actually impossible for any of these applications to actually scan any of the other applications on your phone. So there was no ability to, in fact, do any protection. But also, there was really nothing to protect against. No one's getting attacked on these devices. So why is it no one's attacking these devices? Everyone's got phones, they're ubiquitous, people use them at work, they read their work email. Why not go after the phone? Well, it really comes down to economics. It's harder to exploit the phone, in particular the phone's browser, because it's simpler. Phone browsers generally don't support Flash. They don't support Java. They don't allow all kinds of third-party plugins, each of which may be individually vulnerable as well. And then if you do manage to exploit the browser and get something onto the phone, there's not as much data. You don't have a couple terabytes of files attached to the phone. You've got some very small amount of information. You don't even have all of the email repositories. You just have the most recent handful of emails downloaded into the local cache, and the phone would then fetch the rest of them later. So you can't quickly scan through data to find what's the valuable things to go after. The browsers are also typically part of the operating system. They're provisioned by Google or by Apple. And so when there's a problem, those companies make sure that patches get pushed out quickly to lock down any problems, which is different than the scenario on a PC where you need to go out and update the damaged software. Most of the browsers are not necessarily part of the operating system. If you're using Chrome or Firefox, you need to make sure that you're intentionally updating those yourselves. And as we know, people aren't really good about patching, so it probably hasn't happened. So when you look at return on investment, it's less work to attack a desktop, particularly Windows. You can stay there longer because the patches don't come out as fast. You have access to much more data. And finally, on the desktop, people use their browsers a lot. That browser's open almost all the time. You're going to websites. You may even be reading your email and Gmail through the browser. But the mobile experience is really very different, and the trend is moving farther and farther in the direction of really minimal use of the browser. Whereas on the desktop, you'd go to your browser to look at Facebook.com. On the phone, you fire up the Facebook app. You watch YouTube in the browser on the desktop. You watch YouTube in the YouTube app on the phone, or in the Facebook app, or whatever other app you may want to choose. The reality is, mobile devices, the user is largely in an app-mediated experience rather than a browser-mediated experience. So the vast majority of attacks that would take place via those apps rather than via the browser. So with passages, now we wouldn't just have to lock down the browser. To actually provide effective security, we need to secure all of those individual apps. And the operating system probably isn't even designed to allow us to do that. So it'd be this huge complex workaround. But at the end of the day, certainly for the foreseeable future, it isn't where the attacks are happening. You always want to prioritize your efforts, go where the pain is, and solve the problems that are causing the biggest issues. And it simply isn't the mobile devices, certainly not with respect to infection when visiting websites. What isn't destroying corporations, what's allowing the bad guys in, allowing APT actors to penetrate these major corporations, is browser-based attacks. It's phishing links, it's watering whole websites, browsers on the desktop getting exploited by the malware and allowing the person to get in and spread. And so that's why we've focused our attentions there, and why we hope people who buy security will similarly put their dollars where they will have the maximum impact.